She fled from an arranged marriage until a wounded cowboy asked her to be his wife. The stagecoach lurched over another deep rut, and Clara Whitmore pressed her gloved hand against the window to steady herself. 3 days ago, she should have been walking down the aisle of Philadelphia's grandest church to marry Cornelius Vanderberg. Instead, she was rattling across the Texas prairie with $43, her mother's pearl earrings, and a carpet bag containing everything she owned. The morning sun painted the endless grassland in shades of gold and amber. Clara had never seen so much sky, so much space that belonged to no one. Back home, every inch of land was claimed, mapped, and owned by men like her father and Cornelius, men who traded women like they traded railroad stocks. "Cedar Ridge, next stop," called the driver, his voice carried away by the wind. Clara had chosen Cedar Ridge because it was far enough from Philadelphia that her father's influence might not reach, and small enough that a woman could disappear into its dusty streets. She had no plan beyond survival, no connections beyond hope. The town appeared like a mirage. Wooden buildings bleached by sun, a main street of packed earth, sidewalks raised inches above the dust. It was nothing like the marble and brass of Philadelphia, but it felt honest in a way her old life never had. She found lodging at Mrs. Henley's boarding house and work with Dr. Patterson, whose wife had died the previous spring. The doctor needed help with his practice and his household, and Clara discovered she had steady hands and a calm presence that served her well in both roles. "You're not from these parts," Dr. Patterson observed on her 3rd day as they cleaned instruments after treating a rancher's broken arm. "No, sir. I came west, looking for a fresh start." Running from something. Clara considered her answer carefully. "Running towards something, I hope." They settled into a comfortable routine, Clara managing the house and assisting with patients, Dr. Patterson grateful for competent help and company. The townspeople accepted her presence gradually, though Clara was aware of the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered Henderson's general store. Everything changed on a Thursday afternoon in her 4th week. Clara was sweeping the front porch when she heard horses approaching at speed. 2 men rode hard down the main street, one slumped forward in his saddle, blood soaking his shirt. "Doc!" the uninjured rider shouted. "Need help here?" Dr. Patterson emerged from the house and took immediate charge. "Clara, help me get him inside. What happened?" "Rustlers shot him," the rider replied as they carried the wounded man to the examination table. "Name's Jace Morrison. Found him left for dead near his property line." For the next hour, Clara worked alongside Dr. Patterson to save Jace's life. The bullet had lodged near his shoulder blade, requiring delicate removal. Through it all, Clara found herself studying the unconscious man's face, weathered by sun and wind, with lines that spoke of someone who didn't give up easily. "He'll live," Dr. Patterson finally announced, "but he needs careful nursing. That shoulder will take weeks to heal proper." The other rider, Pete, shook his head. "Jace ain't got family to look after him. His ranch is a day's ride north, and there's nobody there." Dr. Patterson looked at Clara. "Would you be willing to take on nursing duties?" Clara looked down at Jace, something stirring in her chest that she couldn't quite name. Of course, they moved Jace to the small patient room, and Clara prepared for what might be a long vigil. Near midnight, as Dr. Patterson had warned, Jace's fever spiked. Clara spent the night applying cool cloths to his burning skin, whispering reassurances she hoped might reach him. "You're safe," she murmured. "You're going to be fine." As dawn broke, the fever broke too. Clara dozed briefly in her chair, only to wake and find clear, blue-gray eyes watching her. "Morning," Jace said, his voice rough but alert. "Good morning. How do you feel?" "Like I've been shot, but better than I probably should." There was humor in his voice that surprised her. "I'm Jace Morrison, and I owe you my life, seems like." "Clara Whitmore. I helped Dr. Patterson with his practice." Over the following days, as Jace's strength returned, Clara found herself looking forward to their conversations. He was unlike anyone she had known, direct without being crude, thoughtful without being pretentious. He told her about his ranch, a modest spread where he raised cattle and horses, working mostly alone. "Sounds lonely," Clara observed one afternoon while changing his bandages. "Can be, but it's peaceful too. No one telling you who to be or what to want." Clara understood that feeling more than she could say. "I grew up where everyone always knew exactly what was expected of you. Sometimes the loneliness of too much attention is worse than the loneliness of solitude." Jace studied her carefully. "You're running from something back east." It wasn't a question. Clara's hands stilled on the bandage. "What makes you think that?" "The way you talk about your past, like it belongs to someone else." For a moment, Clara considered telling him everything. Instead, she said quietly, "Sometimes running away is the only way to find out who you really are. I understand that. Came west after the war for similar reasons. Nothing back home seemed to fit anymore. The war must have been terrible. Terrible enough to know I wanted something different after." His voice carried weight that Clara recognized, the weight of experiences that change everything. On Jace's 8th day of recovery, Clara was reading to him when heavy footsteps sounded on the front porch. Dr. Patterson's voice rose in protest. Then the door opened without invitation. Sheriff Bradley entered with 2 deputies, all wearing badges and grim expressions. The sheriff was a tall man with a carefully waxed mustache and cold eyes that lingered on Clara with obvious interest. "Mr. Morrison," he said without preamble, "got some questions about how you came to be shot." Jace struggled to sit straighter. Clara automatically moved to help him, adjusting his pillows. "What kind of questions, Sheriff?" "The kind about why you were really out there. See, we investigated your rustling story, didn't find much evidence of cattle theft. Makes a man wonder what you were actually doing." "I was checking my property lines. Rustlers shot me when I tried to stop them." "Maybe. Or maybe you were involved in something that went wrong." Sheriff Bradley's gaze moved to Clara again. "And you, Miss Whitmore, you're new in town too. Interesting how trouble seems to follow newcomers." Dr. Patterson appeared in the doorway, his face flushed with anger. "Sheriff, this man is still recovering from serious injuries. If you have official business, conduct it elsewhere." Sheriff Bradley smiled without warmth. "We'll be back when Mr. Morrison is stronger. And I'd appreciate it if he didn't leave town meanwhile." After they left, an uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Clara could see worry in Jace's eyes, though he tried to hide it. "There's something you haven't told me," she said quietly. Jace was quiet for a long moment. "The sheriff isn't entirely wrong. I wasn't just checking fence lines." Clara felt her stomach drop. "What were you doing?" "Sometimes folks pass through my land at night. Folks who need to get from one place to another without drawing attention. I help when I can." "What kind of folks?" "People looking for freedom. Even though the war's over, some places haven't caught up with the idea that all people should be free to choose their own lives." Clara stared at him. "You help runaway slaves. I help people who want to be free. The men who shot me weren't rustlers. They were bounty hunters, tracking a family I'd helped through the week before." Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not disappointment, but admiration. "So you risk your life to help strangers. Seemed like the right thing to do." That evening, after Dr. Patterson retired, Clara returned to Jace's room. He was staring out the window at the darkening street. "Sheriff Bradley won't let this go," she said. "No, he's been looking for an excuse to cause trouble for people like me. Soon as I'm strong enough to ride, I should head further west, start over somewhere else." Clara felt an unexpected pang of loss. That doesn't seem fair. Fair is a luxury. Survival is necessity. Clara understood that better than he knew. She sat in her familiar chair beside his bed. "Can I tell you something?" "Always." "I ran away from an arranged marriage. My father chose a man for me, a man I barely knew who saw me as nothing more than a business arrangement. I climbed out my bedroom window 3 days before the wedding." Jace turned to look at her fully. "That took courage. It took desperation, but maybe they're the same thing. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the town settle into night. Finally, Jace spoke carefully, as if testing an idea. "Clara, there might be another way. For both of us." "What do you mean?" "Marriage changes a woman's legal status. If you were married, your father couldn't force you back to Philadelphia, and married men with property are harder for men like Sheriff Bradley to push around than drifters." Clara's heart raced. "You're suggesting we marry?" "I'm suggesting a partnership, legal protection for you, respectability for me. We help each other build something better than what we'd have alone. A marriage of convenience, a marriage of choice. Your choice, my choice. Nobody forcing anything on anybody." Clara stood and began pacing. "This is crazy. I barely know you. You know I help people find freedom. You know I'm willing to take a bullet for strangers. You know I can carry a conversation and treat you like a person instead of property. What else matters? I need to know you wouldn't expect me to be a traditional wife, that you'd treat me as a partner. I can promise that. And if it didn't work out, then we'd figure something else out. But Clara, I think it would work out. I think we could build something good together. And if this story has touched your heart so far, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with friends who love Old West stories." Clara stopped pacing and looked at him. In the lamplight, his face was serious but hopeful. How would this work? "We'd marry quickly before Sheriff Bradley makes his move. Then we'd go to my ranch and build a life there. You could continue helping Dr. Patterson when needed, and I could expand the ranch. We'd be partners in everything." And what would people think? They'd think a wounded cowboy convinced a pretty nurse to marry him. People love that story. Clara felt warmth in her cheeks. "You think I'm pretty? I think you're beautiful. But more than that, I think you're brave and kind and stronger than you know." Clara sat back down, her mind racing. It was an unconventional solution, but no more so than the arranged marriage she'd fled. At least, this would be her choice. "I need time to think." "Take the time you need, but don't take too long. Dr. Patterson says I'll be fit to travel soon, and if I'm leaving, it should be before Sheriff Bradley decides to act." That night, Clara lay awake thinking about Jace's proposal. She imagined life at his ranch, the partnership he described, the freedom to choose her own path. Most of all, she thought about how he looked at her, as someone worth knowing, not owning. The next morning she brought him breakfast and sat in her chair. "I've been thinking about your proposal." "And?" "I have conditions." Jace set down his coffee cup. "I'm listening." "First, this would be a true partnership. I want to be involved in decisions about the ranch, our life together." "Agreed." "Second, if either of us decides it isn't working, we discuss it honestly." "Agreed." "Third, I want to continue helping Dr. Patterson when needed. I've found I'm good at this work." "Makes sense." Clara took a deep breath. "Fourth, I want us to be honest about what we hope for. I'm not expecting grand romance immediately, but I'm not looking for a purely business arrangement either. I'd hope that partnership might grow into something more." "I'd hope for that too," Jace said softly. "Then my answer is yes, Jace Morrison. I'll marry you." They were married 3 days later in Dr. Patterson's parlor, with Pete as witness, and Mrs. Henley providing wildflowers from the prairie. Clara wore her best dress, and Jace wore a clean shirt Pete had brought from the ranch. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. When asked if she took Jace to be her husband, Clara looked into his eyes and said, "I do," with more certainty than she'd felt about anything in years. When the traveling preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jace's kiss was gentle but not tentative. Clara felt something spark to life in her chest, warm and promising. The next day, they began the journey to Jace's ranch. Clara rode behind him on his horse, her arms around his waist, feeling the strength in his healing body as he guided them across the open prairie. "Tell me about the ranch," she said as they rode. "About 2,000 acres. Good grazing, year-round creek. House on a rise where you can see for miles. Nothing fancy, but solid. They reached the ranch in early afternoon, and Clara's breath caught at the sight of her new home. The house was larger than she'd expected, built of logs with a wide porch and windows that promised light and air. Beyond it lay a barn, corrals with horses, and pastures where cattle grazed. "Jace, it's beautiful. It will be, with the right partner to help make it more than just a place where a man sleeps." The house's interior was simple but comfortable. A main room with stone fireplace, kitchen with a good stove, and 2 bedrooms. Pete had prepared one bedroom with fresh linens and wildflowers, his way of welcoming Clara. That evening, they shared their first dinner as husband and wife in their own home. Clara had prepared a simple meal, and they ate by lamplight while prairie sounds drifted through open windows. "What happens now?" Clara asked. "Now we learn how to be married. We figure out how to share this space, this life. We see if partnership can become something more." Clara looked around the kitchen, imagining years of shared meals, shared work, shared decisions. It felt like possibility. "I think I'd like that," she said. Over the following weeks, they settled into married life with surprising ease. Clara discovered she had a natural aptitude for ranch work, tending the garden, helping with cattle, managing the household. Jace proved to be a patient teacher and considerate partner, always including her in decisions. Their physical relationship developed gradually. The first time Jace really kissed her goodnight, Clara's knees weakened. The first time she fell asleep in his arms after a long day working side by side, she woke thinking this was what marriage should feel like. But their happiness was threatened when Sheriff Bradley arrived one morning with 2 deputies, all armed and official. "Mrs. Morrison," the sheriff said, not dismounting, "interesting news from back east. Seems there's a gentleman in Philadelphia looking for his missing daughter, a Miss Clara Whitmore, who disappeared before her wedding." Clara felt her blood chill, but stood straight. "I'm Mrs. Morrison now, Sheriff. Your father's offering a reward for your return. Says you're not of sound mind, need family protection." "That's a lie. I left of my own free will." "Maybe so, but law says a father has authority over his unmarried daughter." "Of course, there are questions about this marriage's legitimacy." Jace stepped forward, tension in his shoulders. "What questions?" "Questions that arise when a woman marries a man she's known 2 weeks, right after he's shot in suspicious circumstances. Makes folks wonder about coercion." "Nobody coerced anybody," Jace said, voice low and dangerous. "We'll see. You're both coming to town with me while this gets sorted out." Clara felt panic rise. After everything, was she to be dragged back to the life she'd escaped? They were held in separate cells in Cedar Ridge's small jail. Through her barred window, Clara could see the main street where she'd walked as a free woman, where neighbors had begun to accept her as one of their own. On the second day, Pete brought devastating news. "There's a man in town," he reported quietly. "Well-dressed Eastern fellow, asking questions about when you arrived, who you've been seeing." "My father," Clara whispered. "And Clara, he's been talking to Sheriff Bradley about annulling your marriage. Says he has lawyers who can prove it was made under duress." That evening, familiar heavy footsteps approached Clara's cell. "Hello, Clara." She looked up to see her father, impeccably dressed as always, wearing his usual expression of cold disappointment. "Father, you've caused quite a disturbance, my dear, running away from poor Cornelius like that. But he's willing to overlook this episode. The wedding can still proceed once we resolve this unfortunate marriage. I don't want to marry Cornelius Vanderberg. What you want has never been the consideration. You have responsibilities to the family. This cowboy offers you nothing but poverty and disgrace." Clara stood and walked to the bars. "He offers me freedom. Look around you, Clara, sitting in jail like a common criminal. Is this the freedom you chose?" "Yes. Even this is better than the cage you built for me." Her father's expression hardened. "You'll think differently once you've had time to consider. The sheriff's releasing you to my custody. We leave for Philadelphia tomorrow. I won't go. You have no choice. Your marriage will be annulled, and you'll be my legal responsibility again." The next morning brought another visitor, Cornelius Vanderberg himself, looking as coldly perfect as ever. "Clara," he said, as if greeting her at a dinner party, "your father and I have discussed this situation. I'm prepared to be generous. Agree to marry me immediately upon returning to Philadelphia, and I'll ensure no charges are filed against your current husband." Clara's heart stopped. "What charges?" "His involvement with runaway slaves is still illegal in several places. There are also questions about whether he coerced you into marriage for protection. Legal battles are expensive, Clara. A man like that can't afford to fight accusations backed by serious money. You're threatening him. I'm offering you a choice. Marry me, and he goes free. Refuse, and he spends years fighting legal battles from jail." Clara sank onto her cot. It was a trap as effective as any cage her father had built. That afternoon, Sheriff Bradley brought Clara papers and a pen. "Annulment papers. Sign them and your marriage is dissolved. Don't sign, and we wait for federal authorities to decide if the marriage was legal." Clara stared at the papers. Across the hallway, Jace watched through his cell bars, pain in his eyes, not for himself, but for her. "What happens to Jace if I sign?" "He's released and free to return to his ranch. And if I don't, then federal authorities decide both your fates." Clara made the hardest decision of her life. She signed the papers. The next morning, her father collected her with business-like efficiency. She was allowed to retrieve her belongings from the ranch under escort, then loaded onto the eastbound stagecoach. As the coach pulled away, Clara caught one last glimpse of Jace standing outside the sheriff's office, defeat in his posture, something broken in the way he held himself. Back in Philadelphia, Clara married Cornelius Vanderberg in the same church where she'd originally refused him. She wore the same dress, spoke the same vows, but something inside her had changed forever. She had learned she could survive alone, make hard choices, find love in unexpected places. That knowledge couldn't be taken away. As she stood beside Cornelius at the altar, Clara thought about Jace and wondered if he ever sat on his ranch porch, remembering their brief time together. But stories have a way of taking unexpected turns. 6 months after her wedding, Clara was sitting in her Philadelphia drawing room when the butler announced an unexpected visitor. "Mr. Morrison to see you, ma'am." Clara's book fell from her hands. "Show him in." Jace entered like a piece of Texas prairie transported to Pennsylvania, dusty, wind-burned, completely out of place among the velvet and gilding. He was thinner, with new lines around his eyes, but unmistakably the man she'd married and lost. "Hello, Clara." "Jace." Her voice was barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I came to tell you something I should have said before. I love you." Clara's heart stopped. "Jace, I know you're married to someone else. I know it's too late. But I couldn't live without telling you. What we had was real, Clara. That was the closest to happiness I've ever been." "Why now?" "Because I've spent 6 months thinking about what I could have done differently. The biggest mistake I made wasn't getting shot or letting your father find you. It was not fighting harder to keep you. There was nothing you could have done. I could have told you I loved you before it was too late. I could have asked you to come away with me. Consequences be damned." Before Clara could respond, the door opened and Cornelius entered with 2 men she didn't recognize. "Mr. Morrison, I expected you might appear eventually." Jace turned to face him. "Vanderberg, you're trespassing and disturbing my wife. I could have you arrested. Your wife asked to see me. My wife has no authority to invite visitors." Cornelius looked at Clara coldly. "Go to your room, Clara. I'll handle this." "No," Clara said. Both men looked surprised. "I said no, Cornelius. I'm not a child. You're embarrassing yourself. This man is nobody, a cowboy from some frontier town. He's someone who treated me like a person instead of property. I've given you everything, wealth, position, security. You've given me a beautiful cage, but it's still a cage. Clara turned to Jace. You asked if I'd come with you. Yes. Then yes. My answer is yes. Cornelia stepped forward, face dark with rage. You can't be serious. I'm choosing who to love, Clara said simply. The only choice that was ever truly mine. She took Jace's hand. I love you too. Ndee. What followed happened quickly. Cornelia shouting orders, Jace pushing Clara toward the door while blocking pursuit. Clara grabbing her cloak and the emergency money she'd hidden months ago. They ran through Philadelphia streets like the fugitives they were, but Jace knew where he was going. At the railroad station, he produced tickets for the next westbound train. I bought these before coming to see you, he explained, as the train pulled away from Philadelphia. Just in case you were brave enough. As Pennsylvania disappeared behind them, Clara felt no regret. This time, she was choosing freely, not running from desperation, but toward love. What about the legal complications? She asked. There are places west where people can start fresh with whatever names they choose. We could be whoever we want to be. Mr. and Mrs. Anyone, Mr. and Mrs. Free, Jace said, and Clara laughed for the first time in months. They traveled for weeks, changing trains and directions to make following difficult. Eventually they reached Colorado territory, where James and Clara Carson, their chosen names, found work and a small house in a mining town that asked few questions about people's pasts. Clara used her medical experience to treat injuries common in mining country. James found work as a ranch foreman. They built a life entirely their own creation, never speaking of the past except in general terms. 2 years later, they were married legally in the small territorial church, with new friends as witnesses, and Clara wearing a dress of blue silk she'd sewn herself. When the minister asked if Clara took James to be her husband, she said, I do, with a voice that carried across the entire church, strong and certain. After their legal ceremony, they bought a small ranch outside town with money they'd saved. Clara continued her medical practice while helping manage their growing herd. James expanded their grazing land and built a comfortable house with windows that framed the Colorado mountains. On their 5th anniversary, Clara was sitting on their porch, watching James work with a young horse, when she reflected on the journey that brought them there. She thought about the woman who'd climbed out of her Philadelphia window, desperate and frightened. That woman could never have imagined this life, this love, this person she'd become. Ever regret it? James asked that evening, as they watched the sunset paint the mountains gold and red. Clara looked at this man who'd offered her partnership instead of possession, who'd waited for her to choose him freely rather than demanding compliance, who'd given her space to become herself rather than trying to shape her into his ideal. Never, she said, not for a single moment. The story that began with a woman fleeing an arranged marriage had become the story of a woman who chose her own life, her own love, her own definition of happiness. It was written in frontier dust and mountain wind, in quiet moments between two people who'd found not just love but freedom in each other. As stars appeared over the Colorado peaks, Clara Carson, formerly Whitmore, briefly Morrison, now permanently Carson by choice, thought about courage and love, about the women who might be trapped in drawing rooms at that moment, wondering if they had the strength to choose something different. She hoped they did. She hoped they'd find their own wounded cowboys, their own chances to discover who they really were when no one was telling them who they had to be. Sometimes the best marriages, she reflected, are the ones that start with two people brave enough to bet everything on the possibility of something better than what the world offered them. Our stories are created to inspire and entertain, showing that courage and love can triumph over difficult circumstances. We hope this Old West tale has touched your heart. Please subscribe to our channel, like this video, comment with your thoughts, and share with friends who love stories of adventure and romance. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to bringing you more stories from the frontier of the heart.